Hollywood versus reality. Coming up. Hey 7-4 crew, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name's Kelsey. I'm a 747 pilot. My channel, 7-4 Gear, is all about aviation. I previously did a Hollywood versus reality on Con Air, which is a transportation of criminals in the sky. I also did Passenger 57, where Wesley Snipes plays a good guy who's fending off terrorists on an aircraft. In this video, we're combining both of those things together. This movie came out in 1998. It was US Marshals. I'll put a link to the video, the full video, down in the description if you want to check it out. But we're gonna see how realistic this was. Let's get into it.
Clearance, FPATS 343, Memphis with India.
Okay, it's on to Memphis and then LaGuardia, and we call it a night.
Wow, where do I even start? The first thing is, as you see the plane taxiing away, the pilots would not be taxiing with that door in the back open like that. There's going to be some type of an indication that they're going to know that door's open, and you're never going to move the plane until all the doors are secured up. So, super Hollywood. Some pilots might say that maybe these pilots were going fast so they could go home, but they already mentioned they had to do 2 more legs that night. Something that does happen, however, is that pilots on the last leg of the 4-day pattern or whatever pattern it is, on that very last one, a lot of times they will fly faster in order that they can make their flight home or so they can drive home. Truthfully, they're saving like 4 or 5 minutes, but they'll fly faster, they'll ask for more shortcuts, they'll taxi faster on the ground, and we do all this stuff on what's called go home leg. We don't, however, taxi with doors open. We would never do that. The next thing I'm going to tell you could make you nervous and comfortable at the same time. So a plane is full of holes. People don't really know that. They think a plane is like a balloon, but it's not. There's air leaking out all the time. Some of it's planned and some of it's not planned. So the plane is always continually being pressurized. So when you have something like a hole, could be a bullet hole, a huge, enormous hole is not going to rip open because there's holes all over the hull of the aircraft. Most people don't know that, but your plane is continually being pressurized from the engines. The other reason why that is relevant is people think, oh, I don't want to breathe this recycled air for 9 or 10 or 15 hours like what I'm doing. But the reality is there's always new air coming in and there's always air that is leaving the plane. Some of it is getting recycled, but there's always new air getting pumped in the plane. If you didn't let old air out, then your plane would be overpressurized. So there's always air leaving and always new air coming in. So now that we know that there's holes all over the plane, we know that a small hole is not going to turn into something like this. That is 100% Hollywood. Something that I am confused about that Hollywood seems to always do is why is there, when there's this hole on the side of a plane, whether the door's been blown open or a small bullet has ripped up this massive hole or whatever it is, there's always a ton of paper. Always. There's always like libraries amounts of paper getting blown all over the plane. Makes no sense. Unless those convicts are back there setting things up or writing a manuscript with a bunch of loose paper, it makes no sense at all where all this paper's coming from. The Marshals, who are on the other side of a fence, have a bunch of paper. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. I've never flown on a Con Air aircraft, and I'm not a Marshal, but they have paper. I've seen them traveling around. They've seen them with little briefcases. Do they have that much of loose leaf paper? Probably not, but there's a fence there. So how is that paper getting through that fence unless all the cons also have paperwork that they're having in their hands? So that also is very Hollywood. And since we're talking about the fence, let's talk about this right here. While there would be a rush of air that's leaving the plane, that is true. If you were to have a hole like that, you would have a rush of air that's leaving. It wouldn't be so dramatic that it would suck Tommy Lee Jones up against the fence and hold him like that. The other thing is the nose of the aircraft is pointed downwards. So he's got gravity to help him fall backwards, and the airplane is not going to be sucking so hard all the way back in the plane like that to hold him up against the fence. That's not how it works. Once that plane is equalized, meaning that all the air that's been pressurized inside the plane is now equal, there's no reason for him to be getting sucked out. It's now equal. So that gush of air initially was over, so there's nothing to hold him up against the fence, and a hole that size would take, I don't know, a second until the whole plane was equalized. The next thing I want to talk about is the artificial horizon. You've seen me say keep the blue side up. Well, this is the blue side that I'm referring to here, but this right here where it says dive, I've never seen that on a plane that I fly. I'm not saying it doesn't exist because I actually looked it up to see it does exist. I've just never seen it on a plane that I've flown. If you're headed towards the brown side, which is the ground, you should know you need to dive. You really don't need to label that. Now, there was one scene of this clip that was accurate. Kind of. It's this one. Descending at 2,000 feet per minute is not fast at all. That's a super normal or even shallow descent rate on a normal aircraft. So that's not accurate. If you had a huge hole in your plane, you'd be wanting to go down a lot faster than that. However, the watch your airspeed is accurate. If you were to have this situation, I think I talked about it in Castaway, but if you were to have this situation where you have an explosive decompression of the aircraft, you have this huge hole in the side of your aircraft, you're not going to want to accelerate. Reason being, let's say you have maybe part of that metal's out into the wind of the side of the aircraft. You don't know, but if you now accelerate to get to 10,000 feet even faster, you could make that plane start to rip open like a tuna can. So you're already flying, you know the plane is okay, you're flying at that current speed. When you start going down to 10,000 feet or whatever the safe altitude is for that area, you're going to want to get down as quickly as you can, but without going faster. So you're going to bring your throttles to idle or your power to idle, and you're going to try to get down to 10,000 or whatever the altitude is as quickly as possible without accelerating. So that thing about watching your speed is accurate. 2,000 feet per minute, you'd be going a lot faster than that.
Engine failure on 2 and 3.
Indy Center, this is FCOTS Flight 343. We are declaring an emergency. Mayday, mayday.
First, what is this guy doing? I mean, it comes straight from the ceiling, straight down. You pull it to release the flow of oxygen and you put it on your face. Really not that complicated. If you can be a marshal, you should be able to pull on a cord and put oxygen mask on. Obviously, these people on the plane are in jail because they're not good at following instructions, and that's also apparent by the fact that none of them have put on their oxygen masks. Everybody knows when the oxygen masks fall down, you pull it and you put it over your mouth. Pretty simple. Not a single criminal has put on the mask though. But the real reason that I wanted to pause it here is because he talks about the engine failure in this clip here.
Engine failure on 2 and 3.
Indy Center, this is FCOTS Flight 343.
Those are for an engine fire, not an engine failure. And since I've been trying to tell people what they could do to make it better in case any producers ever get to this channel and watch it, if they wanted to create a fire, they could use those handles, but they would just say, oh, we have a fire in engine 2 and 3, not a failure in engine 2 and 3. Now this is engine number 3 up here, and this is engine number 2 right here. I don't see anything flying to engine number 3, but okay, sure. Let's just imagine that something did fly in there, and now they have a fire in engine 2 and 3. Then you would see those two things there illuminate red. So that part is very Hollywood as well. Something else that is very Hollywood is that you see the captain here is flying the plane, but then you also notice the first officer is also flying the plane, and then you'll notice here that the engineer seems to be flying the first officer. The reality is there's only going to be one person flying. If one guy's flying and he's messing it up, the pilot might say, hey, you take the controls, and they do exchange of controls. But you're never going to see two pilots with their hands on the controls at the same time, even in an emergency situation. One's flying, one's fixing, repairing, or whatever, but that's what's happening. Here you have both pilots flying and the engineer in it as well. In real life, what would happen here is the captain might be on the radios and flying, since he was the pilot that was flying. He might be on the radios and flying the aircraft at the same time. The engineer and the first officer would be running checklists and doing things to get the plane to stop screaming at them, to get the alarms to shut off and things like that. They're not both going to be there letting the plane scream. Even if you're in an emergency, you're going to get those things shut down and secure those engines, not let them just be out there on fire or failure or whatever they think has happened, but they had it showing as a fire. So you'd want to get those things secured up and then continue with whatever checklist that would need to be handled, and then you'd go back to normal duties. Captain would be flying, and you as a first officer in this case would be running the radios. So that's what would happen in real life in this scenario.
240, 220, 17,000. 13,000. I've got it. 1,000. 10,000.
What the hell was that? Lost engine 2 and 3. A and B hydraulic failure as well.
Look at your chart, see if there's any airport you think we can make.
There's nothing close. There's a road 20 miles ahead.
Okay, that's it then. Indy Center, this is FPATS 343.
All right, so there is something that they did accurate here, and that was switching from the flight levels to the altitudes at the correct altitude. Listen to this.
240, 220, 17,000. 13,000.
In the US, we transition from flight levels to altitude at 18,000 feet. In every country it's different. In some countries they have multiple different altitudes in which they make that, which seems unnecessarily complicated, but what do I know? But here it is accurate in the US that you would switch from altitude to flight levels at 18,000 feet. Now, a little tidbit of information if you're talking to a pilot. They say transition level when you're going down, transition altitude when you're going up. That's a little fact that a lot of pilots don't know. So if you want to show some pilot just how much you know, ask them what the difference is between a transition level and a transition altitude. That won't typically work if the pilot does a lot of international flying, but if they only do domestic, especially in the US, they may not know that. So the difference between the flight levels and the altitudes and how you say them would be this. If you're at, let's say, 17,000 feet, you'd say, I'm at 17,000 feet. Now when you're at 20,000 feet, this is in the US of course, when you're at 20,000 feet, you're at flight level 200. So you just say the first three numbers of that flight level. That also means that if you were climbing to, let's say, flight level 400, but you were at 23,500 feet, what you would say is flight level 235, climbing flight level 400. So you just say those first three numbers, no matter what they are, and then whatever altitude that you're going to. So the switch over from flight levels to altitude, that was correct. However, what's incorrect is that earlier we talked about them doing a 2,000 feet a minute descent, which is not enough in this scenario. However, he's losing also at about a 7 degrees pitch down, which you can see from this picture right here. That's roughly 7 degrees pitch down. They're losing 60,000 feet a minute now. And you can tell that because they're losing about 6,000 feet in about 6 seconds. Now I've seen pilots lose 10, maybe 12,000 feet without passengers in the back, just an empty aircraft. I've heard of guys doing 10 to 12,000 feet in the descent. I've never done that, but I have heard of it happening. So in a 10 or maybe 12,000 feet descent, that would be an aggressive descent that you'd be doing. But to get 60,000 feet a minute on the descent, you're probably going to need a little help from these guys. Earlier I said you don't want to accelerate when you're going downhill because you're trying to get down as quickly as possible without speeding up. However, you'll hear the engines when the plane levels off, they rev up. The engine should be at idle. They should be at idle, and you only have one engine working because the other two are on fire or failed, but you would only have one engine going. So you would have that engine at idle, you'd get down, and then once you started to round out your descent at 10,000 feet, you would start accelerating. However, they did it a little bit different. It kind of sped up and then it backed off. You would have to have a lot of power on that one engine in order to be holding whatever altitude that you needed to be holding. So that's also very Hollywood. Okay, Now let's discuss this part here.
Lost engine 2 and 3. A and B hydraulic failure as well.
So they said they lost the 2 engines, or that, I don't know, they're still on fire. Either way. But they also talked about losing hydraulic system A and B. A lot of hydraulic systems on aircraft are powered from the engines. So that is possible. I don't know this aircraft. I don't know which systems are powered by what, but it is accurate to say that you would lose hydraulic systems with the loss of engines. That part is true. Hydraulics on an aircraft power all kinds of different things. They can power the gear, they can power the control surfaces of the aircraft. Obviously, if you've seen me with my shirt or sleeveless shirt, you can see I don't have the muscles to lift a 1,000,000-pound aircraft when we're taking off the ground. The way that's done is by hydraulics, and the way those hydraulics are powered are from the engines. So there are going to be lots of hydraulics, which are very important. You are going to want the gear to be able to come down. You're going to want to have control surfaces. But the thing to know is that most systems have redundancies. So your hydraulic might be, let's just use a normal 2-engine jet that you typically fly on. You have one system that's getting powered from one engine and another system that's powered from another engine. But there's going to be redundancies to cover almost all the very, very essential things that you need on your plane. So when you lose an engine, you can fly fine on one engine. You can also get all the different hydraulics and stuff that you need from that one engine to accomplish the task that you need of safely landing that plane again. These engineers are crazy smart, and they've come up with all kinds of ways. If you ever study a plane, I mean, this was my experience. I'm not a super smart person, but when I read this stuff, I'm like, this is so simple. But it's made so simple because the people who designed them are geniuses. So they've designed this in a way that, okay, you've lost this thing which powers your hydraulics, so we'll make this engine power a backup or a different way so we can accomplish all the primary things that we need in order to get this plane safely on the ground again. Which brings us to this part where he mentions 20 miles ahead there's a road.
There's a road 20 miles ahead.
Okay, that's it then.
First of all, us as pilots, we don't carry, when we're doing this type of flying, we don't carry charts that have the road markings and things like that. It's not necessary. We have roads in the sky that we fly. We have totally different charts. So him saying, oh, I'm looking at this chart and there's a road 20 miles ahead, you would never do that. And you might ask, why don't you have that? You should have all that type of stuff. And that's because commercial jets are designed to operate on less than 50%. So let's say you had a 2-engine aircraft and you were to lose an engine, you can fly just fine on one engine. Or on a 747, if you lose 2 engines, you can fly fine on 2 engines. It's not fun. You're not going to want to cross the ocean. You're not going to want to do a go-around, but you can fly on 2 engines to get yourself to the ground. Same thing here. You have 3 engines, you can lose 2 and fly on the 1. It's not going to be comfortable, but you can make it work, and that's part of the training. So what would actually happen in this scenario is the pilot would tell air traffic control, we need to land at the nearest suitable airport. And you would way rather fly on one engine to the nearest airport and land there than land on a road. So you're not going to be able to know where the road is, and you're not going to be able to, not going to have lighting, it's not going to have anything, it's going to have stuff all around it, there's going to have probably cars on it. You're never going to want to land on a road, and you'd way rather land at an airport. So you would tell air traffic control, because they can see your position better than that chart. So now we have GPS, so we can see a lot more exact where we're at. At this time, you just had paper charts, which sucked to figure out where you're at. So this guy could have amazing situational awareness, but he's not going to know specifically where they're at because they've been in a descent with all these emergencies and stuff that are going on. Makes no sense. So you would tell air traffic control, we have an emergency, we need to get to the nearest airport, and they'll give you a heading to fly to. That's what it would be like in real life. The other thing that's unrealistic and very Hollywood about this scene is they're at 10,000 feet, and they have to get down to, I'm guessing, sea level. I don't know exactly where they're at, but let's just say sea level. So they have to lose 10,000 feet in 20 miles. That's a very aggressive descent. The typical rule of thumb in aviation is for every 1,000 feet that you lose, you're going to move 3 miles forward. So 30 miles out would be normal. They're saying 20 miles out. So you can imagine that's a very aggressive descent that you're doing to get onto this road. in the middle of nowhere, which is dark and unlit, and you don't know, and you're just guessing that it's roughly 20 miles there. So that 3,000, that's called the 3-to-1 rule. Every 1,000 feet you lose, you move 3 miles forward. It's a general aviation rule. So, you know, if they said, oh, there's a road 40 miles up ahead, that would make sense if they wanted to land on the road. But 20 miles up ahead at 10,000 feet, that's not going to work unless they want to make it really aggressive, which, I don't know, they just did 60,000 feet a minute on the descent, so maybe that's what they're going to do. Let's see.
And still losing altitude. We have lost 2 engines, and we need to make an immediate emergency landing. Make the announcement.
All passengers, brace for impact. We're making an emergency landing. Lean forward, place your head between your knees, and brace for impact. Keep your head down. Brace for impact.
I just had to pause that real quick. How many times is this guy going to say brace for impact?
Brace for impact.
Something that you have to listen for here is that you see that the pilot puts the thrust reversers on. That's that loud noise that you hear as soon as you land, that loud roar. Those are thrust reversers. And what that's doing, it's taking the air that's normally pushing your plane forward and that's not pushing you forward. It's sometimes pushing you reverse, or it's pushing out just towards the ground. So the air is not pushing you forward. You're not continuing to accelerate because now you're on the runway and you want to stop. So that thrust reverser that you showed there, he opens that up all the way. You would not do that when you only have one engine. The reason being is because you have asymmetric thrust or thrust reverse, meaning you have just one side is now pushing or pulling. So think of it like this. If you were in a car and you only had one brake working, you wouldn't stomp on your brakes really hard, right? Same concept. You wouldn't open up your thrust reversers all the way. You would slowly do it so that way you made sure you stayed on the middle of the road or the runway in real life. So what you would actually do in real life is that you would use just the brakes to slow down and stop. Now, if your brakes were on A and your backup brakes were on hydraulic system B, and we've lost both those hydraulic systems, I don't know, maybe C doesn't do brakes, and that's possible. If you were to have that scenario, then you're going to want to use the thrust reversers, but you're going to gently do it so that way you stayed down the middle of the road in this case. You wouldn't just yank it back, because you yank it all the way back, you're not quite sure how it's going to impact your aircraft, and then you could just get shot into the woods or off the road. So you would bring it back very slowly in real life. The pilot's face here isn't like, oh no, we're gonna crash. It's more like, oh, life is just not working out for me. Clearly, the brakes were not on hydraulic system A or B because they're fully locked up here, and that is not how it works in real life. Your brakes have anti-skid, meaning if you stomped on the brakes as hard as you could, there may be some skidding, but it's going to let the tires have traction. It's just not going to be a full lockout like you're seeing there. That's not how it would work. And with the plane and the tires fully locked out like that, and the one thrust reverser which he able to pull back and properly stay down the middle of the runway without any problems, that's plenty of road for that plane to stop. It's not a super heavy aircraft. So with the tires fully locked up like that, and the one thrust reverser, and that distance that you see, there's plenty of time for them to stop, but of course, this is Hollywood. So the plane's wing keeps knocking these poles, but the pilots are able to perfectly maintain the center of the road, which is impressive. I would not be able to do that. But would knocking your wing off make the whole thing explode? Well, gas, as I talked about, is kept in the wings. Would this create an explosion? Probably not. It would just rip the wing off and fuel would come out. But I will give them credit. There is gas that are in the wings, so Okay, let's just imagine that somehow it caught fire. That would be possible, maybe. The other thing I'm confused about is there were no alarms, but now that they've crashed on the ground, there's alarms going off in the plane again.
God, we're running on the road, guys.
Just so you know, there is no alarm for ripped wing coming off, so that's not a real thing. All right, let's see what this last scene looks like. Two things that are confusing me. First, how are there still papers flying around the cabin of this aircraft? A library amount of paper has already flown out of the plane, including the 2 manuscripts from the convicts, which went into engine 2 and 3, setting them on fire, aka shutting them down. So I don't understand how there's still paper that's in there. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, the only working engine was number 1 on the left side of the plane. That engine has been ripped off. As you can see right here, it's gone. So engine 2 and 3 have been shut down or broken or on fire or failed or whatever has happened. And engine number 1 is gone. So when the plane rolls over here, listen to what happens. So what engine is that? 2 and 3 have already failed and shut down. 1 got ripped off, so I'm not sure which engine that is. If you want to see another Hollywood versus reality, you're going to want to check out this video here. And if you want to see something that is actually real and pilots that are struggling with real life situations, check out this video up here. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.